The 71st UN General Assembly brings countries together to discuss North Korea's nuclear program, among other global issues. Seoul is on the move to turn up the heat on Pyongyang. Korea's economic indices signal more trouble for the economy in the coming months. What risks lie ahead, and what does this mean for the country's growth prospects? All this and more straight ahead. Welcome to News Inside. I'm An Jiang-kan. Let's meet our panelists. Professor Shin Sang-hyuk from Kyung University Graduate School of International Studies is back with us. And Dr. Pong Young-sik from Yonsei University Institute for North Korea Studies is with us as well. Following North Korea's fifth nuclear test, South Korea has been moving swiftly to counter growing threats and solidify a joint front against Pyongyang. We look at what's being done to pile more pressure on the North.
The South Korean government has vowed to take all possible steps on the military and diplomatic front to counter growing threats from North Korea, especially in light of its recent fifth nuclear test. Military forces in the South warned Pyongyang against pursuing its self-destructive nuclear program and conducted joint fighter jet drills with the U.S.
북한이 만약에 군사적 도발을 감행한다면 체제가 뿌리채 흔들리도록 강력하게 응징할 것입니다.
Not only that, the two sides announced a more detailed outline of extended deterrence against the North in a three-step model based on the level of nuclear threats. Mounting pressure against Pyongyang is also seen in the field of diplomacy.
우리는 국제사회와 함께 더욱 강력한 제재와 압박을 통해 그리고 한미 정상 간 합의한 확장 억제를 포함한 한미 동맹의 억제력 강화를 통해서
To begin with, member nations of the six-party talks, excluding North Korea, have kept in close contact, emphasizing the need for peace on the Korean peninsula. Also, Seoul's Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se attended the UN General Assembly, where he reiterated the rising risks from North Korea's provocations and secured support from each country. Meanwhile, back in South Korea, the country's National Assembly adopted a resolution condemning Pyongyang's latest nuclear test as people continue to look for answers on how to resolve the deadlock with North Korea.
North Korea's nuclear program has been discussed at length at the 71st UN General Assembly, and a joint statement was adopted by the foreign ministers of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan, along with Washington's promise of extended deterrence. What do you make of this statement?
There is only a natural reaction by all United States, Japan, and South Korea, as well as other UN member countries. Think about all the things that North Korea has done this year alone in 2016, and we have not, spent the entire year of 2016 yet. But North Korea conducted two nuclear tests, the fifth one most recently, and it launched the Eunha, ICBMs. And including the Eunha launch, it has conducted at least 22 missile tests with a variety of the different kinds of missiles. The actions taken by Kim Jong-un regime in the year of 2016 is unprecedented and alarming, even by North Korea's own standards.
Well, this joint statement issued by the country's top diplomats, this is the first since 2010. What prompted it back in 2010?
Yes, at the time, the North Koreans fired dozens of the artillery shells at the Yeonpyeong-do. At this attack, about 2 Korean Marines were killed. Actually, this move prompted the U.S. to rule out the resumption of six-party talks on the nuclear disarmament. Actually, about 2 years ago at the time, the North Koreans abandoned this program.
Well, these three countries are vowing to take a firm stance against the North, but perhaps not surprisingly, Beijing is missing from the picture. What approach do we see China taking?
Right, China has been quite conspicuous by its absence in all these difficult situations. China seems to be trying to learning time to conjure up enough international support to justify it's called for the resumption of six-party talks. However disappointing and porous it might be, six-party talks in the eyes of China remain as the most viable vehicle for negotiations to move ahead with issues of North Korea's development of nuclear warheads and long-range missiles. But it is one thing that China wants to have the resumption of the six-party talks. It is another whether other relevant parties, such as U.S., Japan, and South Korea, would accept that proposal possibly made by Beijing. Because the United States government, in the aftermath of the fifth nuclear test by North Korea, clearly reiterated its long-standing position that, of course, the United States government is open to dialogues and negotiations as long as they are authentic for the purpose of denuclearization of North Korea. So what is required for the resumption of a six-party talks to be actually materialized is how North Korea would do when the proposal will be on the table.
So criticism is mounting against the North. What kind of an argument do you think Pyongyang will make to the international community?
Well, I think it's better for us to review the recent statement delivered by the North Korea's Foreign Minister Lee Yong-ho. Actually, on the last 15th, there was the Non-Aligned Movement Summit. At this summit, Minister Lee insists that the North Korea's fifth nuclear test was a response to the USA's military activities in the Korean Peninsula. So considering his statement at this non-aligned movement summit, he is expected to deliver a speech, argue these 2 points to defend North Korea's stance regarding the nuclear missile test. At the General Assembly, he is scheduled to deliver a speech on 23rd or 24th. Maybe he would insist that North Korea is the state with the full sovereignty power. As a sovereignty power state, he insists that North Korea can have the nuclear weapons. At the same time, also, he will ask the international community to recognize North Korea as a state with the nuclear weapons. Well, this logic, seems to be unacceptable for the international community because we have NPT system, and according to the NPT system, North Korea is not allowed to have nuclear weapons.
So at both the international and national levels, there's a strong divide between those pushing for sanctions and those for dialogue. Which side are you leaning towards?
I'm in the position that you have to be open to all the ideas and the proposals because the goal is the same. It is to disarm nuclear North Korea, and the methods, your choice of method is a secondary consideration. But we have to remember that the North Korean regime has demonstrated for the past 40 years at least the very high level of resilience, the survivability under international pressure and internal contradictions. And every time North Korea conducted nuclear weapon tests, now it's the fifth time, the international society was in unison condemning North Korea and combined their effort to impose what was called the unprecedentedly harsh economic sanctions on North Korea. But all those unprecedentedly harsh economic sanctions have consistently failed to curb North Korea's pursuit of nuclear and missile capability. So pressure itself seems to have been proven that not enough to change the behavior of North Korea. At the same time, the engagement school argues that you have to give North Korea something to lose. That is the way that outsiders would maintain some kind of influence upon North Korea's choices and behavior. But flip side of that argument is that provision of economic aid and diplomatic recognition in certain forms have the effect of embolden North Korean regime to further develop its nuclear and missile capabilities. So you're in a rock and hard place between pressure and engagement. But one interesting point is that according to the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Republic of Korea, Minister Song Min-sun, then North Korea at least stopped its nuclear activities as long as the negotiations were undergoing. Why? Because of the fear of North Korean regime to challenge China. The most important thing that the North Korean leadership had to avoid is to embarrass Chinese leadership. So as long as there's negotiations like six-party talks or bilateral negotiation with Washington were alive, North Korea at least halted its activities.
Well, the current North Korean leadership doesn't seem to be too bothered by what China thinks, judging from the fact that they conducted the fifth nuclear test.
Right. I was secretly inside my mind that you wouldn't pose that question, right? You cannot generalize and apply that what had happened to the first two leaderships of North Korea will also work for this current leadership of Kim Jong-un. But I don't have a good answer for that. And I think that's your homework for the next one.
Well, within the international community, the call for stronger sanctions seems to be gaining more appeal for now. Here's a look at where things stand at the moment.
The UN Security Council Resolution 2270 was adopted 57 days after North Korea conducted its fourth nuclear test earlier this year, and 6 months later, a large number of countries continue to uphold sanctions against the regime. After the North's third nuclear test conducted back in 2013, the UN adopted Resolution 2094, but only 19 countries reported back on sanctions implementation over a 6-month period. But for 2270, 53 countries have so far submitted their reports, and notably nations once close with North Korea, signaling Pyongyang is heading into deeper isolation from the rest of the world.
The problem with UN sanctions is that they're not legally binding. There's no way to force countries to adhere to them. So some have asked whether we need a new mechanism to squeeze the North.
Well, it depends on not only the content of the new sanctions, but at the same time what Chinese government will do in terms of complying with the international sanctions. There are talks now being made in Washington and Tokyo for even tougher sanctions after the fifth nuclear test that now we have to put North Korea back to the list of state-sponsored terrorism. And we have to delete the exception clause in the UN Security Council resolutions that embargo on goods imported by North Korea for the very subsistence of ordinary North Korean citizens should be allowed for the purpose of the basic human rights. That exception clause should be eliminated in the new sanctions. But then when you make the new sanctions tougher and tougher, then it endangers that violation of basic human rights. Another goal of the North Korea policy by Washington and the Park Geun-hye administration of South Korea is to try to drive a wedge between Kim Jong-un leadership and the general population of North Korea. But when you cut off the basic food supply and humanitarian assistance that go to the ordinary North Korean citizens, then that purpose, that aspect of North Korean policy has to be largely compromised.
Yeah.
So you have to juggle different aspects of North Korea policy.
In the meantime, North Korea's Hamgyong region is still reeling from what's said to be the worst floods in more than half a century. Now, Pyongyang is openly asking for international aid. Do you think this is a genuine call for help, or is there an ulterior
I don't
motive?
think it is not a genuine call for help. Actually, according to report, the Hamgyong region, there was a very big floods, and then the total number of the victims reached several hundreds. and then the number of people who lost their homes, and this time and just after this flood, the North Korean the government, unlike the previous cases, they immediately asked the help to the international community. But we can take it as a genuine call. But I don't think so, because when you consider the situations facing the North Korea, as Dr. Bong explained already, the United Nations imposed economic sanctions. Even they consider tougher economic sanctions against North Korea. On the part of North Korea, it's quite burdensome in some sense. So definitely they want to change those kind of hostile circumstances against North Korea, because they are in trouble. So they want to buy some minds of the people in these countries. So to change the hostile circumstances against North Korea in the middle of the economic sanctions, the North Koreans want to use this float. And at the same time, because of the some economic sanctions imposed by the United Nations and the individual countries such as Japan and United States and Korea, some North Koreans are really worried about the future life. So in such a kind of situations, by attracting all people's attention to flood, definitely they can minimize the risk takings caused by the flood.
Isn't it also interesting that Kim Jong-un never really visited the flood-stricken region?
Right. You just took the word out of my mouth. Right. I mean, if the situation is as serious as reported by the North Korean official media, then we are supposed to see the top leader inspecting the site of the flood. But we have not seen the Kim Jong-un in action.
But when tens of thousands of people are displaced, if they are displaced as they are claimed to be, it's hard to decide between sanctions and humanitarian aid, and Seoul seems to be split about that
I guess the Park Geun-hye administration, at least judging from the statement issued by the Ministry of National Unification, has decided not to provide emergency aid to North Koreans in this crisis. Of course, the first reason being we do not have the on-the-ground verifiable and credible evidence that this is indeed a serious crisis. Two, the general atmosphere in favor of providing humanitarian aid to North Korea is extremely low. I mean, in the aftermath of the fifth nuclear test. So I guess Park Geun-hye administration is gravitated toward just waiting to see if the situation is as what it is reported by North Korea.
And North Korea has yet to make an official call for help to South Korea.
Another interesting dimension of North Korea's behavior this time, that it reached out for the emergency aid to 9 other countries and the United Nations, but not to South Korea. I don't know whether it's motivated by maintaining its national pride, but that's another point that is very interesting. But going back to my previous point, that important component of North Korea policy so far by Park Geun-hye administration is to further separate the North Korean regime and North Korean people. Then providing humanitarian aid. Assuming that humanitarian aid, at least a part of it, will actually reach the North Korean people in need, then there will be a very effective and necessary policy tool to realize that goal by South Korean government. That's something that Park Geun-hye administration may want to consider. And two, it will improve the image of South Korea. Ronald Reagan, the former president of the United States, although he was a diehard hawk toward the Soviet Union and other communist countries at the final phase of the Cold War, maintained that, quote, hungry child does not know politics. Hungry child does not know politics. So he represented the position of the conservative leadership in the United States and the Free West, that very tough on military manners, but maintained a clear separation between military strategy and humanitarianism. So There is an example set by other countries that Park Geun-hye administration may take into account in this case.
Moving on to economic news, the Korean economy went through some rough patches in the first half of the year. So how are things looking for the remaining months? Take a look.
Data from the Bank of Korea shows the country's real GDP grew by 0.8% on year in the second quarter, up 3 percentage points from the first 3 months of the year. At this rate, the Korean economy is expected to reach 2.7% growth this year.
상반기 실적이 그 한국은행 조사국 전망과는 큰 차이가 없습니다. 따라서 앞으로 그 전망 수준이 유지된다면
With economic growth sitting under the 1% mark for 3 consecutive quarters, there have been concerns about slipping into a low-growth cycle. Especially troublesome is Korea's main driver of growth exports, which have been logging an extended streak of negative growth, barely climbing back into positive territory to 2.6% in August for the first time in 20 months. But with a global shipping crisis triggered by the demise of Hanjin shipping unraveling this month, outbound shipments are again expected to head south. Other economic indicators are also looking bleak, with output dropping 0.1%, retail sales sliding by 2.6%, and investment nosediving 11.6% in the month of July. With troublesome signs looming ahead, we look at what other risks there are to the Korean economy in the remainder of the year.
So there are just over 3 months left of 2016. If there is one economic issue you would like to see resolved quickly, what would it be?
Well, that is the restructuring of shipping industry. As you know, we have the economic structure heavily rely on external trade. And then to export, we need shipping. But world's 7th largest shipping company, Hanjin, they face serious difficulties. So because of the decision made by the government dealing with the Hanjin situation, Hanjin case, definitely the Korean exporting industries face serious difficulties. So I wish this issue should be settled down as soon as possible.
What about you, Dr. Bong?
Well, from the perspective that there are so many moving parts going on in terms of government's effort to set up economic justice and anti-corruption campaign, that the government investigation of the Lotte Group has to reach a certain point, because as Professor Shin pointed out, not only the Hanjin case, the Lotte case, and many other cases, economy is very much under the influence of psychology of the investors and consumers. So things have to be settled and stabilized.
So how do experts and the public feel about the current economic situation? The Finance Ministry conducted a survey on roughly 340 experts and 1,000 members of the public. While 75% of the experts polled said they believe conditions are worse this year than the last, over 57% of the public said not much has changed. In terms of the risks ahead for the remainder of the year, most people cited instability in the job market, while analysts pointed to the delay in corporate restructuring and souring economic sentiment. So why do you think there's this discrepancy between what the public feels and the experts think?
I think the experts are more interested in analyzing the long-term growth potential of national economy, and general public are more focused on their individual and household economies. So their measuring sticks or foresight are different.
So the economy was bad for them last year and bad for them this year, so pretty much the same. Is
I
that
don't
what
know.
they're
I
saying?
don't know. As an individual, economy is always bad. It's never been so good for me.
So, Professor Shin, what do you see as some of the biggest risks ahead for the Korean economy?
There are several risks. First of all, as I explained already, shipping and shipbuilding industries. I mean, considering the contribution of these two industries, we have to find a solution to revitalize these industries. Particularly shipping industry, you know, this time the Korean government stopped providing special loans to them. This is very different from other countries' situations, because shipping industry can directly affect their exports, and then But this time, the Korean government insists a kind of principles. That means that if any company are not competitive, the government will not help them. So we have to think about which is more profitable for the national interest, not only on the short-term basis, but also on the long-term basis. Second one is huge household debt. 1,300 trillion the won. This is huge money, isn't it? And then to make matters worse, the government cannot suggest a way to reduce this household debt. If this money reached to the amount which is out of control, then what kind of situation we will face? That means deflation. And if deflation comes, we will be in the same situation to Japanese. We are very familiar with the two decades last years in Japan. If deflation comes, definitely it will be very difficult for us to revitalize the economy. So this must be threats on the Korean economy. Last one, I think this is in fact the beyond our ability. There is a possibility of the interest, increase in U.S. According to the report, out of 10 federal open market committee, which is the one committee in the Federal Reserve System in the United States, they're dealing with the interest rates and then money supply the policies in the United States. Out of 10, actually the original number of the FOMC it should be 12, but two people are waiting, in the progress of the nomination. So at the moment there are 10 committee members. Out of 10, 8 the committee member, they said that there are high possibility of increased interest rate in the United States. If interest rate of the United States increase, what kind of situation we will face? Interest rate in Korea also increase. Then the Korean economy will be shrinked because of the so-called financial cost would go up. Then if financial cost go up, the people, the industry should pay more money to borrow the money. That means that the production cost will go up, then the consumption will be shrinked. So it's very bad for the Korean economy, particularly in the middle of the economic crisis. Definitely, this can be a third the threats to the Korean economy.
About Hanjin shipping, the government so far has refused to extend a lifeline. And it's the same for other flailing companies as well. Why not this time when the government has bailed out huge conglomerate firms in the past?
Yes, that's a very important point. They provided huge special loans to shipbuilding industries. STX shipbuilding industry, the government has provided about 4 trillion 60 billion won. And then for the Daewoo, the Marines, shipbuilding industry, they provided 4 trillion won. But why not Hanjin? Personally, I cannot understand the government decision this time. Of course, when you look at the principle, yes, the government decision is correct. But when I consider the real economy in Korea, definitely the government should be more careful in making a decision this time.
Because it could have a direct impact on our exports.
Definitely. The next year, the many government think tanks insist that the estimated economic growth in the 2017 would be 2.6%. Considering the global economic situation, definitely is too low to keep the dynamism of the Korean economy. It should be higher than 3%. Then, because of this decision regarding our Hanjin shipbuilding industry, company, definitely it is expected to have about 17 trillion damages in our industries, in our economy. It's not small. It's quite a big loss for the Korean economy. And as we discussed so far, we have only 3 months left. So personally, I think this decision made by the government was too, careless in some sense.
Maybe responding to criticism that the government has been bailing out too many companies, but maybe they made the decision with the wrong company this time.
But is there a political necessity to keep the right balance, maintaining the long-term growth potential of the industry and the national economy as a whole? and protecting the principle of economic justice and fairness, and dealing with the long-held moral hazard by the majority shareholder of those companies in trouble.
That's a very important point. But on the other side of the coin, well, by having this situation, Koreans lost confidence.
Right.
If once we lost confidence as a consumer, as a producer, whatever, it could be a fatal blow. So I think everything has two sides, but we have to consider both sides to make a final decision. But personally, I got the impression the government just consider one side this time, rather than both sides. So, well, then from now on, we have to think about how we're going to deal with this case. I think that will be more important to restore the confidence among Koreans as a consumer, as a producer. I think we will be able to revitalize Korean economy. I think that's very important.
Despite all this, Korea has managed to maintain robust sovereign credit ratings. How do you think that was possible?
Well, in terms of the national debt to the GDP ratio, South Korea's economy seems to be in a very healthy condition. So there should be some scientific grounds for these credit companies to raise the standing of Korea by one more grade. In terms of national debt ratio, the national debt to GDP, South Korea is about 40%, which is far lower than average 100% of the United States and UK. And Japan is 240%. And South Korea also has a foreign reserve in the scale of the 370 billion US dollars, which is number 7 in the world. So there are some objective reasons for these credit companies to be confident about South Korean economic state.
But just because the credit ratings are sound doesn't mean that the economy is
Right.
just as sound.
Right. So there is a great deal of uncertainty. If you look back the past generations, there are many important cases in which these credit rating companies miserably fail to objectively and correctly measure the companies and the national economy as well. For instance, when Korea was hit hard by the early stage of Asian financial crisis in December 1997, these credit rating companies only changed, rapidly lowered the credit rating of South Korean economy only 2 months before the arrival of the crisis.
Right.
So there was not, they cannot be seen as a timely estimate of South Korean economy.
Meanwhile, Samsung Electronics sold off its shares in 4 overseas tech companies worth an estimated 1 trillion won in total. Some say it's to clean up the mess generated by the Galaxy Note 7. Others say it's part of a long-term strategy. What do you think?
Well, I'm not an economist, but I welcome this decision, and I think the focus is not just clearing the mess, but reducing the fat in time of persistent economic uncertainties nationwide and worldwide, as Professor Shin mentioned. It seems like we are living in the era of a great deal of uncertainties. I mean, you can lower your primary interest rate as many times as possible. That cannot be a fundamental solution to boost your national economy. So Samsung seems to decide on the strategy to streamline its strength, following other very successful precedents by major corporations in the United States. For instance, when Mr. Jack Welch, highly praised as the savior of the GE, when he assumed the top position of GE, he surveyed all the products GE produced at the time and eliminate all the producing line that were not number 1 or number 2 in the world. So even huge corporation like GE decided on streamlining its production line. And Steve Jobs, when he assumed the position and came back to Apple in 1993, Apple at the time was producing 350 different kinds of products, but he reduced the number of products to 10. And in 2008, under the leadership of Steve Jobs, Apple produces 30 products. And the company had grown as a company of the revenue of the 30 billion US dollars. So less is more under certain circumstances, like in the fashion industry, following Calvin Klein's maxim, less is more.
Right. Well, the big question now is how do we beat these current economic doldrums?
I think the government should spend more money.
Through supplementary budgets?
To supplement budgets. Well, actually the government recently made such a decision to provide the supplementary, the budget. Then the question is that we don't have money. Then from where they got the funds? So to do that, the government should have to increase the corporate taxes or income taxes, particularly corporate taxes. We know very well many big chaebols, conglomerates have huge amount of money in the pocket, but they do not use the money because the uncertainty in the Korean economy and the global economy. So let them pay more. With that money, we can use the money to revitalize Korean market. But there must be some dark side of this policy. That means if they increase the corporate tax, the business activity circumstances, doing business activities in Korean market seems to be aggregated. Of course, yes, there must be such a kind of the concerns, existing concerns. But at the moment, I think by imposing more taxes on the big companies particularly, we could revitalize the depressed Korean economy. So when you combine this policy, increase the taxes, and then to implement the quantitative easing policy, I think the Korean government can revitalize the depressed Korean economy to some degree.
All right, well, we have to wrap up. Any final words?
Well, in fact, the Korean government should have to make every effort to keep the dynamism of the Korean economy this year, because this year seems to be very important in determining the next year economy. Considering the world economy is not expected to recover very fastly, we have to keep the dynamism in our domestic economy. This is very important. So to keep this one, definitely the Korean government should make every effort.
Dr. Bong?
My closing remarks regard young viewers of this program. I was quite encouraged and pleased that a lot of young South Koreans, but also young viewers in foreign countries like Singapore have been following this program posted on the Facebook and on the Arirang TV website. And they asked me what should be the best preparation for this time of uncertainties. They are extremely concerned about their lives after graduating from college, how to find good jobs. And my answer, based upon our discussion today about how uncertain the current world economy and national economy are, and the uncertainty will not easily go away because we are in transition to different kind of industrial revolution. The best bet for young people is to develop themselves as a reliable and capable free agent. The past, when you can rely on your corporations or the government or labor union, is long gone. You have to invest in yourself. You have to make your skill set portable.
We might need a whole session devoted to that one of these days, perhaps. Well, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us today. That is all for this edition of News Inside. Thanks for watching. We'll be back with more next week.